What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. Man, today is another great day to be alive, another great day to go fishing. And even though it is a great day to be alive, the weather sucks today. It is currently 36 degrees. It is raining, sleeting, and spitting snow just a little bit, and it is just brutal outside. It's one of those days that I probably need to be inside next to a fire, but I loaded the boat up because I know, as well as you guys probably know, that days like today fish tend to eat. And so this time of year when it gets crappy, you just kind of got to grit your teeth, put on your AFTCO rain gear, and go catch some fish. And that's what we're going to try to go do today. But today's video is going to be just slightly different than some videos I've been putting out lately. Now, we're still keeping it affordable, keeping it close to the house, but one thing that we are going to be focusing on today is I'm going to show you guys kind of exactly what I'm looking for when I'm fishing some of the things that I'm fishing, because I can show you guys the gear, I can show you guys the baits that I'm using, I can tell you all about all those things, but if you don't know how to go apply them, then you just don't have as good of a chance of going and catching fish on your lakes. And so I want to take some tips on the lakes that I like to fish and hopefully give them to you guys to go apply on your bodies of water. And we're going to use everything. We're going to use our eyes, we're going to use the boat, we're going to use electronics, we're going to show you everything that I'm looking for when I'm trying to catch a fish. And hopefully you guys will enjoy this. Hopefully it'll be useful for you guys. And without further ado, I'm gonna shut up. We're gonna get to the lake, we're gonna get this boat in the water, and we're gonna hopefully go catch a whole bunch of fish. There we go. Bam. Yep. Whoo, Lord. Yep. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That's one of the ones we're looking for right there. That is a good fish. Catch 5 of those today. We're going to be doing something back in the water. Thank you for a good time, sir. Thank you for a good time. Ready, buddy? There he goes. There he goes. Heck yeah. That's awesome, guys. That's awesome. Why did I pick this crankbait up? Well, there's really 3 main reasons why I picked this crankbait up. Reason number 1 is going to be the simple and kind of most anecdotal reason, and that is they've been biting this crankbait. And so I'm going to pick up the thing that they have been biting. In the recent trips that I've come out to this lake and went fishing, you know, they've been eating this thing pretty good. You guys saw the video I did. Come back out here with Dad, caught some fish. And so they've been eating this crankbait. Also, looking at the bigger kind of anecdotal picture, you know, not the micro, but the macro of the anecdotal picture of my fishing experiences. This time of year, fish love these small body, medium diving crankbaits on these highland reservoir style of lakes that I fish a whole lot this time of year. You know, there's more vertical banks, more rock, that kind of stuff. In my fishing world, those are very important things that fish relate to, and they will eat crankbaits like this. Reason number 2 that I picked up this crankbait is the crankbait itself, the diving depth of the crankbait. I am fishing this more kind of bluffed out sort of bank, which we'll get to here in just a minute. But what that means is this is essentially straight up and down. You know, this bank does not gradually kind of get deeper, deeper, deeper. This is just kind of what you see on the bank here. It is a straight drop down. And really what it is kind of a stair step effect. You guys can actually see that stair step right in here on my 360. So this is like a ledge, drops off. That dark line is where it drops again, and then it drops again out here and kind of levels out into the river channel. As you guys can see, I got my boat about, I'd say 20 feet off the bank, sitting in about 15 foot of water, and that way I can fish down those stair steps with these crankbaits. And those fish get on those stair steps this time of year because it's easier for them to move up and down than it is for them to move horizontal. So, you know, when they drop the water like they have today, they've dropped the water probably 3.5, 4 feet, just getting ready for some rain that's moving in here, getting ready for some, you know, like a front that's moving in. That's what these dams are made for, is to prevent flooding. So they've dropped the water about 3 feet. These fish don't have to swim this direction or this direction. They just swim straight down. They literally just drop with the water level, and they can stay in the same depth of water which they've been living in. And then the third reason that I'm picking this crankbait up is a more kind of scientific reason, is that these fish start eating a lot more crawdads this time of year. There's fish. And these crawdads, just came on. These crawdads in these bodies of water tend to turn these really kind of bright orange, you know, blaze orange colors. And so I've got two colors tied on today. One is obviously the blaze that I've been throwing, and then the other one is this blaze tail crawl, which is that same blaze color, but it's just the belly and a more natural top. And that's going to do a really good job of mimicking these crawdads. And that kind of goes back to why I choose crawdads over shad, because you hear a lot of people this time of year say, you know, the bass are focusing in on the shad, and they do. It's just more anecdotal for me. You know, in my experience bass fishing on these lakes, crawl patterns tend to do better. And so what I would say is pick up a shad pattern and pick up a crawl pattern, because both could catch fish. It's just kind of figuring out your own, you know, patterns on your lake and figuring out what your bite is. But that's kind of the beginning of this. That's why I started here. That's what I'm looking for. We're going to try to catch a few more fish, and then we'll continue to break down, you know, the bank, you know, kind of how the bank works, why I think these fish eat the way that they do, and kind of break down some more of the gear aspects as far as rod, reel, line, and really what I think is important in those aspects of this type of fishing. There you go, guys. Nice little smallmouth there. Not a big one, but a really good fish nonetheless. Ton of fun. So I want to explain why I stopped here, and I think it's super important to catching fish on this kind of bite, and we're going to explain it, but let's get this one back in the water first. One thing that I'm looking for here is obviously what we just caught that fish off of, which is the laydowns, and then we're also looking for this kind of bigger, slatier kind of rock. Those two things for me in this situation specifically, you know, kind of this vertical cranking, you know, this more off water, there's a big fish, there's a big fish kind of deal, attracts these fish like this. Let's actually get this fish in the boat and we will talk about it. Actually got us a good little section here with some good fish that I won't move. Hey, if you guys didn't know, grabbing smallmouth by the bellies comes them down just like that. Let's get this fish unplugged and we'll talk about it some more. Whew, guys, do you think that he wanted it? Look at that, sideways in the mouth. When they're getting it sideways like that, you know you're throwing the right color. That's kind of what I was talking about earlier, you know, how am I choosing those colors? And that proves right there that we probably got the right color. Another good quality little smallmouth. It's vicious, man. When that water gets in the temperature range that it's in right now, man, those things get vicious. What an awesome bite. But anyway, sorry we were rudely interrupted by that smallmouth absolutely cracking that money badger. But you know, now we've talked about what kind of bank I'm looking for, but then once we get to the bank, like, what are we looking for? You know, what are we focusing on fishing to optimize our bites? And the two things that I'm looking for is laydowns and bigger chunk style rock. And you guys can see all the way down through here, we have a whole lot of that. I mean, right here's a laydown. There's hundreds of laydowns up through this bank. And then we've also got that bigger chunkier style of rock. And what that does is two things. Number one, it creates an ambush point. The big chunkier styles of rock, those fish, just like that one right there, will get down in behind those rocks and they'll hang out and they'll just ambush things like crawdads and different little pieces of bait and things like that that come by their face. And that's what a lot of these fish are doing. You know, they're just sitting behind a big chunk rock, or they're sitting beside a log of a laydown or in the limbs of a laydown, and they're just waiting for something to swim by and to make a mistake. And when it does, they're going to rush out and they're going to grab it just like that little dude does. The second thing that does for me is it creates deflection on the crankbait. And that's one thing, you know, when you're throwing something like this money badger, as you guys can see, has this really unique bill. It's got that kind of round shaped bill. And what that bill does is it deflects off of rocks really well. And so not only does it help it to keep from getting hung up, but when you hit a rock, what that bait does is, you know, it'll be coming down, it'll hit that rock, it'll roll off and deflect off, and then it'll come back to center. And when it rolls off and it deflects off, a lot of the times if there's a fish following it, or if there's a fish sitting near it, it's going to make that fish react. And that's really all we're getting these fish to do. You know, a lot of these fish are predatory and they are feeding and they're wanting to eat this crankbait, but a lot of them too, we're getting them to react. There's an involuntary reaction and instinctual drive that a fish has, that when something flashes by its face like this crankbait in this really bright color, they can't help but lash out at it and try to kill it. And that's the kind of instinct that we're hitting. And so when we can bring it by the piece of cover that they're sitting on, that makes them feel like that they can ambush that thing, as well as bringing the combination of maybe banging it off that lay down or banging it off a rock and getting it to deflect, you're kind of hitting every sense that you need to hit to get those bass to eat. And so that's two big things that I look for when I'm actually going down these banks. And as you guys can see, 3 fish on this bank. You know, this is that kind of perfect scenario where this bank is actually going to start widening out down here and getting a little bit shallower, but it's got that kind of vertical style that we look for, that straight up and down bluffed out style bank. We've got the bend in the river that we're looking for, where we've got natural current that's pushing water in here and it's making these fish want to position. And then we've also got the bottom composition that we're looking for, that bigger chunkier rock with a bunch of different wood and laydowns mixed in. So there's plenty of places for these fish to hide. There's plenty of these places for these fish to react out of and to ambush from. And that's how we put fish in the boat. You know, those are really 3 huge factors that I'm looking for when it comes to catching these fish. And the next thing that we got to break down is actually the gear. And we'll get this fish into the boat and then we'll talk about that. Thank you, buddy. All right, guys, so let's talk about the gear, because I believe the gear is one of the most important pieces to putting fish in the boat when we are talking about fishing a crankbait on these bluffed out walls like this. So just to kind of go over what we've already talked about as far as the bait, this is the Berkley Money Badger 6.25 size in Blaze. Now, what I like about the Money Badger is that it's that small body medium diving crankbait. It's got that really unique bill, like I said. It's a tighter wobbling bait, but still puts off a lot of water displacement. It's a weird kind of hybrid. It's not really tight, I would say, but it's not really wide. It's kind of a weird in between. Now, what I really like about this bait, if you guys can hear it, has a weight transfer system in it. So that means I'm going to be able to cast this thing super accurately. And I think that that's super important for this type of fishing, because as you guys can see down through there, a lot of overhanging limbs, a lot of things in my way when I'm casting. And so when I can get this thing going in the direction that I want it to go, I can make a really accurate cast like that up under these limbs and be able to put this bait in places that many other people wouldn't attempt to throw it. And I think that that is super important. Now, the second and third most important thing are going to be the rod and the reel. So what I'm throwing here, this is a Fenwick Bass Elite crankbait rod. This is a 7-foot medium moderate action crankbait rod. And as you guys can see, it has got a ton of parabolic bend. And what that means is that rod is going to bend way down into that blank. I mean, it's bending almost to the last guide in that blank. And what does that is this rod is a composite between glass and graphite. So it's got fiberglass in it and graphite in it. So the graphite is going to give you that kind of backbone. It's going to give you that shut off in that blank. and it's also going to give you that sensitivity, whereas the glass is going to give you that bend, that parabolic bend. And that's super important with these treble hook baits, because it allows that hook to really drive into that fish and not rip a hole in that fish's face. Another thing that is going to do is, like you saw when that fish was surging next to the boat when that big one ate, it allows those hooks to stay pinned. So we're not ripping holes, we're just driving those hooks in with a rod like this, and when it's allowing those fish, when they come up next to the boat, tail walking and stuff like that, to stay pinned. Then the reel is super important too. I'm fishing a 6/8 gear ratio reel. It's a Revo STX. It doesn't have to be this specific reel, but a 6 gear ratio reel is kind of the ultimate speed. I don't know why. I really can't tell you. I'll tell you one guy that fishes 6 gear ratio reels with almost all his crankbaits that said the same thing, that he doesn't know why, but he just knows it works, is Kevin Van Dam. And we all know that he is the ultimate cranker. And so there's something about this 6 gear ratio reel that just allows this bait to have all the action that it needs, allows you to cover the water that you need to cover while just doing something special to the bait. And then as far as the line goes, I'm actually not using fluorocarbon. I'm using a copolymer. This is a 12-pound trilene fluoro coat, and so it is a monocore with a fluorocarbon coating, and so you're getting the attributes of both fluorocarbon and mono in this line. It's got a little bit more stretch, which also helps to keep those fish pinned, kind of plays into that parabolic action of that rod, and it also is neutrally buoyant. And with a crankbait like what I have here, which is a very slow rising crankbait, what that does is, instead of kind of pulling it down and giving it more weight and or making it float like it would with mono, it's just going to be neutrally buoyant. It just allows that crankbait to do what it does, you know. So it hits a point in the water and just stays there. It doesn't sink or float. And so that's the importance of kind of the gear. I think it's super important to have a good crankbait rod. A lot of people ask me, you know, hey, if I could buy 3 or 4 rods, what would you buy? And I always tell them, you know, something heavy, like a 7.3 heavy, 7.6 heavy to frog, flip, do those kinds of things with. A 7-foot medium heavy, just your general purpose rod, a good cranking rod, and a good spinning rod. Now here's a little key for you guys that are saying, hey, I'm on a budget, I've only got 1-2 rods that I can use, and I don't really have money to go out and buy a crankbait specific rod right now, Alex. What can I do? Use monofilament line on a medium heavy rod, and that extra stretch in that monofilament line will actually act kind of like a cranking rod and really help you to bury those hooks into those fish, not rip holes in their face, and allow them to stay pinned when you're fighting them next to the boat. But yeah, guys, that's the gear. I think gear is super important. It allows you to not only cast accurately, to get into those places where other people might not be able to put a crankbait, but also once you got those fish hooked, it allows you to fight them the right way, keep them pinned, and put those fish in the boat, because that's the most important thing. You know, we can hook every fish in the lake, but if we're not putting them in the boat, bank, the kayak, then we're not completely completing the job of what we need to do. There you go, guys. Another little quality fish. Right off that little point out right there on the old crankbait. That's fun. Alright guys, so one thing that I do want to kind of clear up, and hopefully you guys can understand this, is that, there we go, there's a fish. Just like what I'm about to talk about literally just happened with this fish right here. We're actually going to stop right here, get this fish in, and we're going to break this down, because this is super important in fishing this crankbait on this bluff wall. And I think it's something that people need to understand to put more fish into the boat. But let's get this dude unhooked first. That's what it did the other day too. Alright guys, check that fish out. Nice little brown fish. Another one on the money badger. Get him back in the water. Let's break this down, because this is I believe this is super important to this bite, that I think is going to help you guys to get more bites and to have a lot more confidence. Let's take a kind of look at this, because this is super important. One big thing that I want you guys to understand is that your crankbait doesn't always have to be touching bottom. And oftentimes in this situation, and this kind of fishing that I'm doing that I've explained to you guys today, fishing this more vertical style cover, these bluff walls, your crankbait may never actually touch the bottom, because really what you're doing with this crankbait, more than grinding it against the bottom, is you're kind of just following the contour of the bluff itself. You're keeping that bait, you know, 2 to 3 feet, maybe even closer sometimes, off of the contour of that bluff. So you have to imagine, as the bluff drops down, and as we can see this one that's out of the water, that bluff drops down and there's little stair steps all over it, and that crankbait is just kind of tracing down that bluff wall. Sometimes you're never even going to hit the bluff wall, and those fish will actually come out and react to it. And in this case, that's exactly what just happened. I was actually tracing down that bluff, as well as tracing down the side of this tree that's right here in the water. So you guys can see on my 360, that's a tree laying in the water right there, and that's the tree top. And that fish bit right out of the top of that tree top. Now this tree itself is laying in about 15 to 20 foot of water. The crankbait that I'm throwing only dives 11 to 10, or 10 to 11. Well, the top of the tree, the actual limbs, are actually almost out of the water. You can actually see them in the water right there. And so what that fish was doing is he was just sitting in the top of that tree waiting for something to swim by, and he ambushed it. And like I said, when I threw that crankbait in there and actually cranked that crankbait by that tree, I never touched the bottom, I never touched the tree, and that fish come out of that treetop and he ambushed that crankbait. And so it's not necessarily true that your crankbait always has to be touching the bottom and banging off the rocks and banging off the limbs to get those fish to react. I would say that about 2/3 of the fish that I've actually caught today, I was never touching the bottom. I was simply just following the contour of the bluff wall. But I had the added benefit of, when that crankbait did hit something, because of the design of the crankbait and the bill, it deflected off of it and can cause a reaction. But like I said, most of the time I'm not actually touching the bottom. I'm simply just tracing the contour of this bluff with this crankbait. And that's why you want this kind of deeper diving, more, you know, aggressive diving crankbait, is it helps to just trace right down that bluff and get those fish to come off that thing and to react. Video that, golly. Dude. Oh, get out of the trolling motor. Get out of the trolling motor. Dude, he freaking whacked that thing. Come here, buddy. Heck yeah. They're all about this. Oh yeah, they're eating a lot because of that. Yeah. That's when they like to eat. That's when these damn vampire smallmouth come out and eat. Heck yeah. Heck yeah. Golly. That fish ain't even that big, but man, he pile drive that thing. A little bit better smallmouth though. Oh, he came off. Oh guys, that's good right there. I was actually talking to Michael kind of about the pressure situation. These fish have started eating a lot more because the pressure is dropping. We've got a low pressure pushing in here. It's what's bringing all this kind of crappy weather that I'm dealing with today. You know, this kind of spit and sleety snow, the rain, the cold, and this low dropping pressure gets these fish to eat. A lot of people don't believe in barometric pressure when it comes to bass fishing. You know, they say you can catch fish both low and high pressure, which is true. I've caught fish in both low and high pressure, but the fish really start to feed as these low pressures push through and as they bring in this weather. And a lot of the times a low kind of swirling pressure that brings in the weather is going to make those fish eat a lot better. And we have seen that today. As this pressure started dropping at the beginning of the day, the bite wasn't as hot. You know, we weren't getting as many bites, but as this pressure's dropped throughout the day and really brought this front in here and kind of set it down in the valley here in East Tennessee, these fish have started eating a lot better. And it's just kind of a, you know, anecdotal, right? You know, that's something that I'm experiencing now. Other people may not experience it that way, but this is one of those things that anytime I've experienced this, I usually catch fish a little bit better, and it's been no different today.